The camera flashes were blinding, illuminating the $10,000 silk wallpaper of the grand foyer. Eliza Vance stood calmly, a microphone clipped to her lapel, as 3 broadcast cameras aimed past her down the marble hallway. "He's on his way," a producer whispered. Eliza just nodded, her eyes fixed on the reinforced steel door at the end of the hall. Behind that door, a secret lay hidden. Tonight, her husband Arthur Vance was accepting the Philanthropist of the Year award in front of the entire city. But his greatest triumph was about to become his public execution, because Eliza had just brought the 6 o'clock news to their front door. Falcon's Crest was less a home and more a monument. Perched high on 80 acres of private woodland in Greenwich, Connecticut, the limestone mansion was a testament to the fortune of Arthur Vance, a tech baron who had, as the magazines said, digitized the modern world. His wife Eliza Vance was the other half of the power couple. She was old money, the heiress to a shipping fortune, and she provided the class the lineage and the philanthropic connections that Arthur craved. Their life was a meticulously curated performance. Mornings were spent in separate wings. Afternoons were for their respective boards, his corporate, hers charitable. Evenings were for display attending galas, where they smiled for cameras, their hands linked a perfect portrait of American success. The Vance Foundation, their joint passion project, was a behemoth funneling hundreds of millions into arts and education. But for Eliza, the gilt on her cage had begun to tarnish. It started subtly. Arthur, always ambitious, had become secretive. He was prone to locking himself in his study. But this was different. He had become possessive of the West Wing, an entire section of the 30,000 square foot mansion that was ostensibly under renovation. "It's a surprise, darling," he'd said months ago, kissing her cheek. "A new gallery for your collection." But contractors never came. Instead, a specialized security team, men in dark suits who didn't speak, arrived. They worked for a week, and when they left, the West Wing was sealed by a thick, soundproofed steel door with a biometric fingerprint scanner. "Security upgrade," Arthur explained, annoyance in his voice when she pressed him. "After the data breach last quarter, I need a true SCIF, sensitive compartmented information facility, at home. You understand business." Eliza, who ran a multi-million-dollar charitable trust before she'd ever met him, bristled at the condescension. But she let it go. Then the glitches began. The house accounts, which Eliza's assistant Julian monitored, started showing anomalies. Weekly deliveries from Petrosian caviar. Cases of a specific boutique vodka, Beluga Gold line, that neither of them drank. High-end lingerie from La Perla in a size 0. Eliza was a size 6. "Must be a clerical error, Julian," Eliza said, frowning at the invoice. "Have accounting fix it." "I tried Mrs. Vance," Julian replied, his brow furrowed. "They said all charges were authorized by Mr. Vance, personally coded to West Wing Security Protocol. It's a black budget line." A chill, cold and sharp, ran down Eliza's spine. A black budget in her own home. That night she waited for Arthur in the grand library. He came in late, smelling of expensive whiskey and the faint, sweet scent of a perfume she didn't recognize. It wasn't the usual musky Tom Ford he preferred. This was light floral. Fracas. "You're late," she said, her voice neutral. "Bored dinner, darling. You know how it is." He loosened his $500 Brioni tie, not meeting her eye. "I'm heading up. Don't wait." He walked past her, heading not towards their master bedroom, but towards the West Wing. She heard the soft whir of the biometric scanner, the heavy thud of the vacuum-sealed door. Eliza stood alone in the cavernous library, the silence of the massive house suddenly feeling oppressive. He hadn't just gone to his secure office to work. He had gone there to sleep. She walked to the bar to pour herself a glass of water, and her hand trembled. The house was no longer a monument. It was a prison, and she had the sickening feeling that she was not the only one inside it. The next few weeks were a descent into a quiet, paranoid hell. Eliza began to move through her own home like a ghost observing. She was the mistress of Falcon's Crest, yet she was an intruder in a significant portion of it. She noted the patterns. Arthur would spend 2 or 3 nights a week in the master suite, with her performing the role of the attentive husband. On those nights he was charming, apologetic for his workload, and praised her efforts with the upcoming Vance Foundation Gala. He was, by all accounts, the perfect man. Then there were the other nights, the West Wing nights. On these nights he would claim a transcontinental deadline or a secure video call with the Tokyo board. He would retreat behind the steel door, and Eliza would be left alone in their cavernous bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening. The house was old, built in the 1920s, and retrofitted with modern tech. But the bones were old. The ductwork, the ventilation shafts. They were original. One night, unable to sleep, Eliza found herself in the hallway adjacent to the West Wing. She pressed her ear to the cold plaster wall. At first, nothing. Just the low hum of the servers Arthur kept. But then she heard it. It wasn't a business call. It was laughter. A high, silvery laugh, quickly shushed. Then music. Not the classical or jazz Arthur tolerated, but something modern, pulsing with a low bass. She felt the blood drain from her face. Her suspicions turned to the staff. The household was run by Beatrice, a stern older woman who had been with Eliza's family for 30 years. Beatrice was loyal, unflappable, and saw everything. Lately, Beatrice had been avoiding Eliza's gaze. Her hands, usually so steady when pouring tea, trembled. Eliza found her in the main kitchen, long after the rest of the staff had gone home. Beatrice was scrubbing a countertop that was already pristine. "Beatrice," Eliza said softly. The older woman jumped, dropping the sponge. "Mrs. Vance, you startled me. What is going on in the West Wing?" Eliza's voice was not accusatory. It was tired. Beatrice's face, usually a mask of professional calm, crumpled. I don't know what you mean, ma'am. Mr. Vance's private work. Beatrice, you've known me since I was a girl," Eliza said, stepping closer. "Those invoices from Petrosian. The La Perla boxes, the Beluga vodka. They aren't for Mr. Vance, and they certainly aren't for me." Beatrice looked down her shoulders, shaking. "He made me sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. He said if I ever spoke of it, he would ruin my son." Eliza's blood ran cold. Beatrice's son, David, had recently received a prestigious, fully funded fellowship at a medical research lab, a lab that received significant anonymous funding from the Vance Foundation. It wasn't a fellowship. It was leverage. "He is threatening you," Eliza stated, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Beatrice finally looked up, and her eyes were filled with tears of shame and fear. "He brings me the trays. I am to leave them outside the service elevator that connects to the wing. He told me if I ever tried to use the elevator myself, the police would be called. He said it was for a long-term consultant working on a sensitive project." "A consultant?" Eliza repeated the word, tasting like ash. "Do you know her name?" I only saw her once," Beatrice whispered, crossing herself. "Weeks ago. He was bringing her in through the underground garage. She's young, ma'am. Very young. Blonde. I heard him call her Chloe. Chloe, the name echoed in the vast, empty kitchen. Eliza knew a Chloe. Chloe Benson, a former intern at the foundation, a bright, ambitious girl from a poor background, barely 23. Eliza had personally mentored her, impressed by her drive. She had even written her letter of recommendation for business school. The sense of betrayal was so profound, so complete, it left Eliza breathless. It wasn't just infidelity, it was a violation. Arthur hadn't just brought a mistress into their home. He had chosen someone from Eliza's own world, a girl she had tried to help. And he was using their foundation, their legacy as a tool to blackmail her most trusted servant. Eliza put a steadying hand on Beatrice's shoulder. "This is not your fault, Beatrice. You will not lose your son, but I need you to do exactly as I say. Continue to bring the trays. Continue to say nothing. But from now on, you report to me." Beatrice nodded, wiping her eyes. What are you going to do, Mrs. Vance?" Eliza's expression hardened. The shock had passed, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This was not a domestic dispute. This was a war. He wants to call his wing a sensitive, compartmented information facility. Eliza said, her voice dropping to a steely whisper. "Fine. I'm going to treat it like one. I'm going to find out exactly what sensitive information he's hiding." Eliza did not cry. She did not scream. She went to her study in the East Wing, a room of old mahogany and leather-bound books from her father, and she made 2 calls. The first was to Julian, her assistant. "Julian," she said, her voice crisp, "I need you to find every piece of communication between my husband and a Chloe Benson former intern. Check foundation servers, check email archives, everything. And Julian, use the encrypted hard line. Assume everything else is monitored." The second call was to a name she had kept in her father's old Rolodex for years. A break glass in case of emergency contact. "Morrison Investigations. How can I help you?" "This is Eliza Vance," she said. "I need to retain Mr. Morrison. Immediately." Daniel Morrison was not the kind of PI found in pulp novels. He was a former FBI white-collar crimes agent, a man who specialized in high-stakes financial forensics and discreet surveillance. He wore bespoke suits and spoke in quiet, measured tones. He met Eliza not at the mansion but in a private suite at the St. Regis Hotel in Manhattan. Eliza laid it out. The secret wing, the terrified housekeeper. The name, Chloe Benson. "I assume you want divorce-related surveillance, Mrs. Vance," Morrison said, making notes in a small leather book. "Proof of infidelity for the settlement." "No, Mr. Morrison," Eliza said, leaning forward. "My prenup is ironclad. I don't need proof of adultery. The irreconcilable differences clause is sufficient. What I need to know is why. Why in my home? Why threaten my staff? Why this level of secrecy for a simple, tawdry affair? Arthur is arrogant, but he's not stupid. This feels like something more." Morrison looked at her, impressed. "You think the girl is leverage, that someone is blackmailing him. It's the only thing that makes sense. Or, he's blackmailing her." Morrison agreed to take the case. His fee was astronomical. Eliza paid it without blinking. "I need 2 things," she instructed. "First, 24/7 surveillance on the mansion. I want to know every person and every delivery that goes in or out. Second, a full financial workup on Arthur Vance and Chloe Benson for the last 6 months. I want to know where every single dollar is going." "Understood," Morrison said. "We'll be invisible." While Morrison's team set up, Eliza returned to Falcon's Crest and played the part of the devoted wife, finalizing details for the Foundation's Night of Light gala. It was their biggest event of the year, where Arthur was set to receive the prestigious Philanthropist of the Year award. The irony was so bitter, it almost choked her. A week later, Morrison called for another meeting. The St. Regis same suite. He laid out a series of photographs on the polished mahogany table. They were grainy, long-lens shots. One showed Chloe Benson, not in the mansion, but on a rare outing. She was in a black Mercedes Maybach, registered to a shell corps being driven to a private office building in Stamford. "We tailed her," Morrison said. "She doesn't leave the mansion often. Maybe once a week, always at night. She's taken to this building. She goes inside for exactly 1 hour, then returns to your estate." "What's in the building?" Eliza asked. "A private bank, Helvetia Private Trust. Very discreet. Very Swiss." Morrison then laid down a second folder. This one contained spreadsheets, wire transfer records, and incorporation documents. "This is where it gets complicated, Mrs. Vance," Morrison said, his voice grim. "Your husband isn't just spending money on Miss Benson. He's moving money through her." Eliza stared at the documents. She saw Chloe Benson's name listed as the sole director of 3 different LLCs, all registered in Delaware. She saw a series of complex wire transfers, moving in increments just under the 10,000 reporting threshold. The money was coming from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. But the origin of that money? Morrison pointed to a flagged transfer from 3 months prior. "This," Morrison said, "is a $20 million donation made to the Vance Foundation. It came from a tech conglomerate that just won a massive government contract, a contract Arthur's lobbying firm helped secure. The donation was clean. But look here." He traced a line. 2 weeks after the $20 million landed in the Foundation's account, a new initiative was funded, the Digital Futures Grant. That grant, in the amount of $5 million, was awarded to a newly formed non-profit based in the Caymans. That non-profit vehicle, Morrison said, is a shell. From there, the money was laundered, broken up, and transferred to the LLCs controlled by Chloe Benson. She then visits the private bank in Stamford to, well, we can only assume she's moving it into tangible, untraceable assets. Gold, bearer bonds, perhaps diamonds. Eliza felt the floor drop out from under her. This wasn't an affair. This was a conspiracy. Arthur wasn't just cheating on her. He was stealing from their own foundation. He was using their philanthropy, her life's work, as a personal piggy bank. The West Wing wasn't a love nest. It was a high-security holding cell and a criminal's office. He was hiding Chloe Benson in their mansion, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. He couldn't risk his co-conspirator walking around talking to people or getting spooked. He had her locked in a gilded cage, feeding her caviar and La Perla to keep her compliant while she helped him drain their legacy. "My God," Eliza whispered, sinking into a chair. The betrayal was absolute. He wasn't just destroying their marriage. He was destroying the one good thing they had built together. Morrison waited a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Vance, this is no longer a divorce proceeding. This is a federal crime. Embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy. We need to take this to the SEC, to the FBI." Eliza looked up, and the look in her eyes was one Morrison had seen before in boardrooms and in interrogation rooms. It was the look of someone who had just lost everything and therefore had nothing left to lose. "No," she said, her voice shaking with a cold fury. "Not yet. The FBI will seize his assets. This will be tied up in litigation for a decade. The foundation will be destroyed in the scandal. The people who depend on it will suffer." "What are you suggesting?" Morrison asked. "I'm suggesting," Eliza said, standing up, "that he's not the only one who knows how to move assets. The gala is in 3 days. He's expecting an award. He's expecting applause." She walked to the window, looking down at the New York City skyline. "He wants to be in the spotlight, fine. I'll build him the biggest stage in the world. Call Julian. Tell him to liquidate my personal holdings, all of them, and get me a meeting with Camilla Croft at Global News Network. If my husband wants to put on a performance, I'll make sure he has an audience." The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a sea of black tie and diamonds. The Night of Light Gala was the crowning achievement of the New York social season, and tonight it was all in honor of Arthur Vance. Banners bearing his handsome, smiling face hung from the vaulted ceilings. Eliza on his arm was a vision in a midnight blue Oscar de la Renta gown. She smiled for the cameras, her hand resting perfectly in the crook of his elbow. She was the picture of the proud, supportive wife. "You look breathtaking tonight, darling," Arthur murmured, kissing her temple as the flash bulbs popped. "Truly. Are you feeling better?" "Much better," Eliza replied, her smile never wavering. She had spent the last 48 hours claiming a vicious migraine, locking herself in the East Wing to coordinate with Morrison Julian and her new high-powered legal team. "Good. It's a big night for us," he said, squeezing her hand. "It's a big night for you, Arthur," she corrected gently. "I'm just so proud." Inside, the party was in full swing. Senators, artists, and billionaires mingled under the soft glow of the chandeliers. Eliza moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting congratulations. All the while, her mind was a steel trap of logistics. Julian was not at the gala. He was in a parked van 2 blocks away, monitoring communications. Morrison was also not at the gala. He and a 3-man technical extraction team were parked in a black landscaping van on a service road just outside the walls of Falcon's Crest. Beatrice, having been given the night off, was safely installed in a suite at the St. Regis with a bonus in her account large enough to buy her a new house. At 9:00 p.m., Arthur took to the stage to a thunderous standing ovation. The mayor of New York City presented him with the Philanthropist of the Year award. "I am humbled." Arthur began, his voice thick with false emotion. He placed the crystal trophy on the podium. "But I cannot accept this award as an individual. This is for my team, for the people we help, and most of all, this is for my incredible wife, Eliza." He gestured to her at the head table. The spotlight swung to her. Eliza stood, placed her hand over her heart, and smiled, a single perfect tear rolling down her cheek. The room awed. "Her heart, her compassion," Arthur continued, "is the engine of the Vance Foundation. She teaches me every day about the true meaning of integrity, of transparency, and of family. Eliza, my love, this is for you." The applause was deafening. As Arthur soaked in the adoration, Eliza discreetly checked the Cartier watch on her wrist. 9:15 p.m. "Go time," she murmured, undetected. 2 blocks away, Julian typed a command into his laptop. In Greenwich, the entire security grid for Falcon's Crest, except for the West Wing, went dead. The alarms, the cameras, the motion sensors, all of it disabled by the master codes Beatrice had provided. Morrison's team, dressed in black, scaled the perimeter wall and moved silently across the lawn converging on the West Wing service entrance. They had 1 hour, at 9:30 p.m. Eliza stood up from the table. She leaned over to the mayor's wife. "I'm just so overcome," she whispered, dabbing her eye. "I need a moment in the powder room." "Of course, dear. He's a wonderful man," the woman replied, patting her hand. Eliza walked out of the grand ballroom. She did not go to the powder room. She walked down the hall through a side exit and into the cool night air where a black Cadillac Escalade was waiting engine running. She got in the back. "Are we ready, Camilla?" Eliza asked. Camilla Croft, the sharpest investigative journalist in the country, sat across from her, a microphone in her hand. A broadcast team was packed into the vehicle with them. "Live feed is secure," Camilla said, her eyes glinting. "The network has cleared a 15-minute interruption of all programming. This is the biggest exclusive of my career, Eliza. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this?" Eliza looked back at the glowing facade of the museum, where her husband was currently the king of the world. "He built his kingdom on my family's name and on the money of people he deceived," Eliza said, her voice ice cold. She turned to Camilla. "I'm not just exposing him. I'm taking it all back. Drive." The Escalade, followed by a live broadcast satellite van, pulled into traffic sirens on racing north to Greenwich. The 40-minute drive to Falcon's Crest was a blur of flashing lights. Eliza sat perfectly still, her phone in her hand, monitoring 2 separate text threads. Thread 1. Julian. Team is at the West Wing service door, cutting the secondary fiber line now. Julian West Wing is now dark. No internet, no cell service, no external comms. She's on an isolated grid. Thread 2. Morrison. M. We are at the biometric panel. It's a commercial-grade S9 system. Tough. We are using the duress code Beatrice provided. M code failed. He must have changed it. M going to plan B. Breaching the hinges. This will not be quiet. ETA 10 minutes. Eliza's heart hammered. Plan B. Back at the gala. Arthur would be finishing his speech, mingling, accepting congratulations. He wouldn't check his phone for at least another 20 minutes. The window was impossibly tight. The convoy screeched to a halt at the massive wrought iron gates of Falcon's Crest. They were wide open, deactivated by Julian. The Escalade and the 2 Global News Network vans drove straight up the winding, manicured driveway. They parked on the grand cobblestone courtyard in front of the mansion. The front doors were unlocked. "Eliza, this is it," Camilla said, clipping Eliza's microphone to her gown. "Camera 1 is on you. Camera 2 follows you. We are live to the nation in 30 seconds. 10, Eliza said, looking at her watch. "Start the feed now." "We're live," the producer yelled. Camilla Croft looked directly into the camera, her face serious. "Good evening. We are interrupting our regular programming for a breaking news story. We are live at Falcon's Crest, the Greenwich estate of billionaire Arthur Vance, who just moments ago accepted the Philanthropist of the Year award in New York." The camera panned to Eliza standing elegant and poised in her ball gown, the magnificent dark mansion looming behind her. "With me is his wife, Eliza Vance," Camilla continued. "Mrs. Vance, you have claimed there is a far darker story behind the Vance Foundation's success. You've brought us here tonight. Why? Good evening, Camilla," Eliza said, her voice clear and steady, betraying no tremor. "For the last 6 months, my husband has been running a criminal operation from inside our home. He has been systematically embezzling millions of dollars from our own foundation. money intended for scholarships for medical research and for the arts. In the network's control room, producers watched their ratings monitors explode. "Those are shocking allegations, Mrs. Vance," Camilla said, playing her part. "Do you have proof our home is a crime?" "I'm seen," Eliza said, turning and walking towards the front door. The camera followed her. "And the lead conspirator is currently locked inside. Follow me." Eliza moved through her own home as if it were a foreign country. The foyer, the grand hall, the gallery. The cameras captured the obscene wealth, the Rodin sculptures, the Rothko paintings. "This part of the house," Eliza narrated, "is the East Wing, my home. But the West Wing, that is my husband's private domain. He told me it was a secure facility for his work. He lied." They reached the reinforced steel door. It was sealed. From the other side, they could hear a faint, metallic thudding. Morrison and his team were there working on the hinges with a plasma torch. "Mr. Morrison," Eliza addressed him, "please update us." Morrison, his face masked, didn't look up from his work. "Mrs. Vance, the occupant has activated the internal deadbolts. She knows we're here." "Who is she?" Camilla asked, pushing the microphone forward. "Her name is Chloe Benson," Eliza said, staring into the camera lens. "A former intern at our foundation. My husband isn't just hiding a mistress, Camilla. He's hiding his accountant. She is the one who has been creating the shell companies, forging the documents and laundering the money he's been stealing." The thudding from inside stopped. A moment later, a high-pitched, terrified scream echoed from behind the steel. "Arthur! Arthur, they're here. They're trying to get in. Help me." "She's trying to call him," Eliza said calmly. "But we've cut the signal. He can't help her now." Back at the Met, Arthur Vance was shaking hands, his face beaming. His phone in his pocket remained silent. "The hinges are compromised," Morrison yelled over the roar of the torch. "Stand back. Breaching." With a groan of tortured metal, the multi-million-dollar security door was ripped from its frame. It crashed to the marble floor with a sound like a thunderclap. The cameras rushed forward, pushing into the darkness. The air that rushed out of the West Wing was stale thick with the smell of expensive perfume old food and an acrid, burning odor. "Get the lights," a cameraman yelled. Powerful broadcast lights flooded the suite, revealing a scene of utter chaos. This was no elegant guest room. It was a high-tech bunker that had been turned into a hoarder's nest. Piles of La Perla boxes and empty caviar jars were stacked next to towers of blinking computer servers. A king-sized bed, unmade, was covered in spreadsheets, and in the far corner by a small smoking fireplace stood Chloe Benson. She was not the glamorous mistress one might imagine. She was a terrified-looking young woman in silk pajamas. Her hair matted her eyes wide with panic. In her hands, she clutched a heavy-duty document shredder, feeding papers into it as fast as she could. A small pile of charred documents smoldered in the fireplace. "Get those cameras out of here," she shrieked, shielding her face. "You have no right, Arthur. Arthur." "Chloe," Eliza said, her voice cutting through the hysteria. The cameras focused on her as she stepped over the threshold, her Oscar de la Renta gown sweeping across the ruined floor. Chloe froze, recognizing the voice. She lowered her arm, her face a mask of disbelief and hatred. You did this. You did this to yourself, Chloe," Eliza said, her voice devoid of pity. "Did you really think this would last forever? Living in my house, stealing money from children's charities, all while hiding behind a steel door. You don't know anything." Chloe spat, her fear turning to venom. "Arthur loves me. He was going to leave you. He was just waiting for the right time. Did he tell you that before or after he asked you to commit federal wire fraud? Eliza countered, walking deeper into the room. She picked up a ledger from the desk. 3 Delaware LLCs, Helvetia Private Trust, moving foundation money to the Caymans. This is very impressive work, Chloe. You learned a lot during your internship. Camilla Croft and her cameraman were capturing every second. This was gold. Mrs. Vance, Camilla interjected. What are we looking at here? This looks like an office. It's the real Vance Foundation headquarters, Eliza said bitterly, holding the ledger up for the camera. This is where the money really goes. Not to art programs, but to this. She pointed to an open laptop which showed a jeweler's website. On the screen was a 30-carat yellow diamond ring, price on request. He was buying that for me, Chloe whispered, her delusion cracking. As a bonus. He was buying your silence, Eliza said, and the entire time he had you locked in here like a veal. You haven't seen the sun in weeks, have you? He told you it was for your safety. He told you I was unstable. The truth is, you were his prisoner and his accomplice. The realization dawned on Chloe's face, a slow-motion collapse of her entire fantasy. She wasn't the co-conspirator. She was just the scapegoat, the one who signed all the documents, the one who would be left holding the bag. She sank to the floor, the shredder falling from her hands. He promised, she sobbed. He promised me everything. He lied, Eliza said simply. Just then a phone buzzed. It wasn't Eliza's, it was a burner phone on the desk. The signal which Julian had just reactivated was flooding in. The phone lit up with dozens of missed calls and frantic texts, all from Arthur. The king had finally left his castle. He's here, Morrison said, his voice low. Eliza turned back to the cameras, her face a perfect tragic mask. My husband. He's just received his award for Philanthropist of the Year. I believe he's just arrived home. I think it's time he was properly congratulated. She walked out of the ruined wing, past the destroyed door, and back into the main foyer, the cameras following her every step. Arthur Vance didn't use the door. He burst into the foyer from the garage entrance like a bull, his face purple with rage. He was still in his tuxedo, his Philanthropist of the Year pin glinting on his lapel. He had clearly broken every speed limit, from Manhattan to Greenwich. "Eliza!" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the marble. "What is the meaning of this? What have you done?" He stopped dead. The foyer was filled with broadcast equipment, lights, technicians, and at the center of it all, standing by the grand staircase, was his wife, flanked by Camilla Croft and 2 live cameras. He saw the destroyed West Wing door down the hall. He heard the sobbing of his mistress. He saw the red live light on the camera. His entire world, his reputation, his freedom, his fortune evaporated in a single, horrifying instant. "Arthur," Eliza said, her voice dangerously calm. "You're home. We were just airing some of the Foundation's dirty laundry. Literally." "Turn those cameras off," Arthur growled, taking a menacing step forward. "Turn them off now. This is private property. You are all trespassing." "On the contrary, Mr. Vance?" Camilla Croft stepped forward, holding her microphone like a weapon. "We were invited by your wife, the co-owner of this property and co-chair of the Vance Foundation. We've been broadcasting a very interesting story about your creative accounting." These are lies, slander, Arthur yelled, his eyes wild. He looked at Eliza, his expression a mixture of pure hatred and desperation. Eliza, stop this. Stop this right now. We can talk about this. Whatever she's paying you. He snarled at Camilla. I'll double it. This isn't for sale, Mr. Vance, Camilla said coolly. Eliza, please. He begged, his tone shifting. He was the actor again. The charming, desperate husband. Darling, you're not well. You've been under so much stress. Let's get these people out of here and talk. He tried to reach for her to play the part of the concerned husband managing his unstable wife. Eliza didn't flinch. She didn't move. She simply looked at him. The gaslighting is over, Arthur, she said, her voice amplified by the microphone. The performance is done. You built an empire on lies, and you did it using my name. You used our foundation as your personal slush fund, and you imprisoned a young woman in our home to do your dirty work, all while accepting awards for your integrity. She took a step towards him, and for the first time he took a step back. You underestimated me, Eliza said, her voice low and vibrating with a power he had never heard before. You thought I was just a socialite, a decoration. You thought I was too stupid or too weak to see what was happening in my own home. That was your final, fatal mistake. You bitch. He hissed, his mask completely gone. You'll get nothing. I'll destroy you for this. I'll have my lawyers. Your lawyers are busy, Eliza said. As of 9:30 p.m. tonight, Julian, acting on my authority as co-chair, executed a key person clause in the Foundation's charter. You have been removed from the board, effective immediately. As for your personal assets, I filed for divorce this afternoon, along with an emergency injunction to freeze every account you hold. The accounts Chloe didn't know about anyway. Arthur's face went white. He was ruined, utterly and completely. And as for the law, Eliza continued, I believe they're here for you. As if on cue, the sound of new sirens filled the air. But these weren't the ones Arthur had used. These were official. 2 dark sedans and a Greenwich police car pulled up the drive, their blue and red lights flooding the foyer. Daniel Morrison stepped forward, holding up his badge, followed by 2 men in dark suits. Arthur Vance, Morrison said, his voice booming in the suddenly silent hall. I'm Agent Miller, FBI, White-Collar Crime Division. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and embezzlement. Please put your hands behind your back. Arthur Vance, the philanthropist of the year, stared at his wife as the FBI agents cuffed him. He said nothing. His face was a void. He had been so busy building a cage for his mistress that he never realized his wife was building one for him. As they led him out, he stopped and looked at Eliza one last time. It was all for you, you know, he whispered, a final pathetic attempt. All of it. The money. The power. Eliza met his gaze. You're right, Arthur. It was all for me. And I'm keeping it. She watched as they placed him in the back of the car, right next to a sobbing, handcuffed Chloe Benson. The cameras captured it all, the fall of the king and his pawn broadcast live to a shocked and horrified nation. The arrest was merely the end of the beginning. What followed was not a simple divorce, but a financial war fought by armies of lawyers. Arthur, out on bail and facing a federal indictment, was furious and formidable. He hired the most ruthless legal team in New York, determined to drag Eliza through the mud and prove she was an unfit, vindictive spouse who had illegally entreated him. What he failed to realize was that Eliza wasn't just planning her escape. She was planning a hostile takeover of her own life. While Arthur's lawyers were busy filing motions about the illegal media ambush, Eliza's team was quietly executing the brilliant multi-pronged strategy she had formulated in the days leading up to the gala. The first move had been the key person clause. It was an obscure piece of the Vance Foundation's bylaws inserted by Eliza's father's lawyers when it was first established. It stated that if one of the two key persons, Arthur or Eliza, was found to be acting in a way that caused catastrophic reputational or financial harm to the foundation, the other had the unilateral power to suspend their voting rights and access to funds pending a full board review. By providing the board with Morrison's preliminary evidence of embezzlement just hours before the gala, Eliza had legally and quietly seized control. The second move was financial. Arthur had hidden his stolen money, but Eliza had hidden her money in plain sight. For years, she had been diverting the profits from her own premarital shipping assets, not into cash, but into tangible, untraceable assets, art. While Arthur was buying shell companies, Eliza was buying a portfolio of impressionist paintings and blue-chip contemporary art. Her black budget wasn't for caviar. It was for a Monet, a de Kooning, and a Basquiat. These were stored not at Falcon's Crest, but in secure, climate-controlled free ports in Geneva and Singapore. The morning after the arrest, as Arthur's lawyers tried to freeze her assets, they found her bank accounts nearly empty. She had already liquidated the art. A $300 million private sale, executed by Sotheby's private sales division, had cleared just 24 hours earlier. She had become, in a single day, one of the most liquid billionaires in the country. She used that money as a weapon. First, she fully recapitalized the Vance Foundation, paying back every dollar Arthur had stolen with interest. This single move stunned the philanthropic world, and more importantly, the U.S. Attorney's Office. It showed her intent was to save the foundation, not just punish her husband. Second, she set up a legal defense fund for Beatrice, ensuring the housekeeper who had helped her was protected by a team of lawyers as ruthless as Arthur's. When Arthur's team tried to paint Beatrice as an unreliable, disgruntled employee, Eliza's lawyers provided the court with the NDA. Arthur had forced her to sign, as well as proof that he was leveraging her son's medical fellowship. The charge against Beatrice was dropped, and Arthur was hit with an additional charge of witness tampering. Third, she dealt with Chloe Benson. The U.S. attorney offered Chloe a deal: testify against Arthur, detail the entire fraud, and get a reduced sentence. Chloe, facing 30 years, immediately agreed. She handed over every ledger, every password, and every damning voice memo she had secretly recorded of Arthur. The Mistress, the woman Arthur thought was a disposable pawn, had become the prosecution's star witness. Eliza, meanwhile, was dismantling Arthur's public image piece by piece. She gave a second exclusive interview to Camilla Croft. This time, she wasn't the avenging wife. She was the reborn philanthropist. She announced she was dissolving the Vance Foundation and relaunching it under her maiden name, the Eliza Creighton Trust. Its new sole mission: to provide legal and financial aid to victims of high-stakes financial abuse and economic gaslighting. She turned her personal trauma into a global brand. She was no longer just Eliza Vance, the wronged wife. She was Eliza Creighton, the advocate. The trial of Arthur Vance was not just a legal proceeding. It was the social execution of the decade. The downtown Manhattan federal courthouse became a daily circus. Satellite trucks lined Worth Street, and a roiling crowd of media protesters and morbidly curious onlookers gathered every morning held back by police barricades. Tabloids had a field day, branding Eliza the Ice Queen or the Righteous Avenger, depending on the editorial slant. Inside the courtroom was a standing-room-only pressure cooker. Arthur Vance, out on a bail so high it was record-setting, arrived each day, in his perfect bespoke suits, a different somber tie for each appearance. But the charm was gone. The performance was over. He looked gaunt, haunted, a thin veneer of indignation barely covering the raw panic beneath. He was a king without a kingdom, and the public was there to watch the guillotine. The prosecution's case, led by a shark-like assistant U.S. attorney, was methodical, brutal, and technologically sophisticated. They presented Morrison's surveillance, showing the secret deliveries and the timeline of Chloe's imprisonment. They walked the jury through the labyrinthine bank records from the Caymans and Delaware, displaying the flow of embezzled money with damning, easy-to-understand charts. But the star witness, the one who broke the case wide open, was Chloe Benson. She was brought in from protective custody, looking nothing like the intern Eliza had once known, nor the high-strung mistress from the West Wing. Dressed in an ill-fitting grey suit, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, she looked like what she was, a terrified young woman who had been completely broken. In a voice that was often barely a whisper, she detailed her entire relationship with Arthur. She spoke of his initial charm, the mentorship that quickly turned intimate, the promises of a future together. She recounted the day he told her they needed to protect their assets from his unstable wife. He told me it was a game. Chloe testified, tears streaming down her face as she avoided looking at Arthur. He said it was us against the world. He made me sign the incorporation papers telling me they were love letters, proof that he was building a new life for me. For us. When he moved me into the wing, he said it was for our safety, that Eliza was having him followed. It wasn't until the door locked, and he was the only one who could open it, that I realized it wasn't a love nest. It was a vault. As she spoke, Arthur stared at her, his jaw clenching and unclenching. He vibrated with a silent rage, trying to catch her eye, to intimidate her one last time. But she never looked at him. She just looked at the jury, her shame and regret palpable. The prosecution's final witness was Eliza. Her arrival each day was its own event. She wore no black, no mourning colors. She wore tailored, powerful suits in shades of ivory, cobalt blue, and firm gray. It was armor. She walked through the media gauntlet without looking left or right, her face calm and assured. When she took the stand, the entire room held its breath. She was poised, articulate, and utterly immovable. Her testimony was a masterclass in precision. She laid out the financial discrepancies. She first noticed her hiring of Morrison, and the final horrifying discovery of the Foundation's systemic bleeding. Then it was the defense's turn. Arthur's lead attorney, a bulldog named Martin Harris, whose fee was famously $1 million per day of trial, approached the stand. His strategy was clear: if you can't beat the facts, destroy the witness. Mrs. Vance, or should I say Miss Creighton, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. Quite a show you put on. Is it true you orchestrated a media ambush, a live broadcast, storming of your own home, complete with television cameras? It is true, Eliza said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room, that I invited journalists to be independent third-party witnesses as I uncovered a federal crime in progress. I was advised that given my husband's power, transparency was my only protection. Protection or publicity? Harris shot back. "Weren't you just angry? Mrs. Vance, furious, scorned your husband was in love with a younger, more beautiful woman. This whole charade, the cameras, the FBI, it was all just the revenge of a jealous wife." The courtroom murmured. Eliza waited for the silence. "Mr. Harris," she said, leaning forward just slightly. "My husband's infidelity was a deep personal disappointment. His decision to systematically steal over $20 million from a children's cancer research fund, that was a public and moral atrocity. I acted accordingly." The jealous wife narrative evaporated. Harris, furious, changed tactics. "You speak of acting. You acted like a vigilante. You bypassed the police. You bypassed the FBI. You set up your own breach. I contacted the FBI the moment I had incontrovertible proof," Eliza countered smoothly. "Agent Miller, who you see sitting right there, was fully apprised. They were in fact waiting for my signal. What you call a vigilante act, the prosecution calls a citizen's cooperation in a pre-planned sting operation." Harris was losing, and he knew it. He went for a final desperate blow. "You're a financial predator yourself, aren't you, Isum? Is it true, Ms. Creighton, that in the 24 hours before your husband's arrest, you secretly liquidated over $300 million in assets? Art, wasn't it? You were stealing from him, draining the marital accounts before he could stop you." This was the moment. The entire jury leaned in. Eliza met his gaze, her own filled with a cold pity. "Mr. Harris, as you well know from the prenup, which your client signed and which has been entered into evidence, all art purchased with my premarital inherited funds remains my sole separate property. I did not drain marital accounts. I leveraged my own. For what? To flee, to build your own empire?" "No," Eliza said, and her voice now carried the weight of a CEO, not a wife. "I liquidated those assets for a very specific purpose. The following morning, I made a $20 million donation to the Vance Foundation to cover the exact amount your client stole. I then created a $50 million stabilization fund to pay the salaries of the 200 employees whose jobs your client put at risk. And finally, I used it to establish the Creighton Trust, which will now in perpetuity provide legal and financial aid to victims of high-stakes financial abuse. Yes, Mr. Harris, I was planning. I was planning to save my life's work from the man who was supposed to be my partner." She had not just answered the question, she had delivered her own closing argument. Harris, his face pale, looked at the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." The closing arguments were a formality. The prosecution painted Arthur as a sociopathic predator who wore a mask of philanthropy to hide a heart of pure greed. The defense made a weak, rambling case about a marriage gone wrong and a vindictive woman's elaborate setup. The jury was out for less than 2 hours on the charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud in the case of the United States for Arthur Vance. How do you find guilty? The word struck. Arthur, who had been staring at the table, flinched as if he'd been shot. On the charge of embezzlement from a charitable organization, guilty. On the charge of witness tampering, guilty. 12 counts, 12 resounding guilties. Arthur Vance sank in his chair, his face the color of ash. Eliza watched her face a perfect tragic mask. She felt no joy, no triumph, just the profound hollow ache of a necessary amputation. At the sentencing hearing a week later, the judge was scathing. "Mr. Vance," he said, looking down from the bench, "you were a man who had everything. Wealth, respect, a partner who was your equal in intellect and generosity. You squandered it all. You preyed on the vulnerable, on a young, impressionable employee, on the public who trusted your foundation, and on the sick children who were the beneficiaries of that trust. It is the judgment of this court that your extreme arrogance and calculated predatory nature, masked by an obscene abuse of public trust, warrants the most significant penalty. I sentence you to 25 years in a federal prison. For Chloe Benson, her cooperation and testimony earned her leniency 18 months in a minimum security facility and 500 hours of community service. As the marshals moved to cuff him, Arthur, his $5,000 suit rumpled, looked at Eliza one last time. His eyes were not pleading. They were not apologetic. They were black with a venomous, bottomless hatred. He said nothing, but his look was a final, silent curse. Eliza met his gaze unflinching. She held it until he turned away, a broken, defeated man being led to his cage. She stood and walked out of the courthouse, past the throng of cameras that erupted at her appearance. She didn't stop to give a statement. She got into the back of her waiting car. As it pulled into the anonymity of New York traffic, the Ice Queen finally let her armor fall. She leaned her head against the cool glass, and for the first time in a year, she allowed herself to cry. Not for him, not for the marriage. She cried for the woman she had been forced to become, and for the profound, terrifying, and absolute relief of the woman she was now finally free to be. The war was over. Falcon's Crest was seized by the federal government and sold at auction. The proceeds were all folded back into the victims' compensation fund. Eliza, now known only as Eliza Creighton, never set foot in the house again. She moved into a sleek, modern penthouse overlooking Central Park. Her new life and the vital work of the Creighton Trust was just beginning. The story of Eliza and Arthur Vance isn't just a tool of infidelity. It's a raw look at how power, greed, and arrogance can build a prison, even in the most luxurious mansion. Arthur Vance thought he was untouchable, that his money and his charm made him invincible. He built a steel-doored cage for his secrets, but he forgot that the woman he underestimated was the one who held the master key all along. Eliza's story is a chilling reminder that the brightest spotlights often cast the darkest shadows, and that true justice isn't just about exposing a lie, but about having the courage to rebuild a more powerful truth in its place. What did you think of Eliza's ultimate plan? Was it brilliant justice or cold-blooded revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories where the truth always comes out, make sure to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible true-life dramas every single week. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update.